Okay, Sam, why don't you kick us off and we'll go from there.
Perfect. Thanks everyone for attending today. My microphone works very well, unlike Jason's here. But we're going to spend some time talking about security compliance as code and how do organizations create an internal framework to help automate data collection to support a HITRUST assessment or other sorts of compliance audits. And we're not just going to talk about this theoretically, but we're also going to talk about how do we start to implement this, right? It sounds really simple on paper, but where do we begin when we're a large organization? How do we kind of pick a piece to start? And we're going to walk through today examples of where to start, how to begin that journey, and then how you can continue to build on that to support your HITRUST assessment or other compliance.
Okay, so who are we? Sam?
Perfect. Thanks, Jason. So my name's Sam Boderman. I am a senior manager out of the Baker Tilly, Minneapolis office. I've worked with Baker Tilly. I've been at the firm for 12 years, a little over 12 years now. And I help lead our HITRUST practice and work with tons of different clients like you guys and help support HITRUST both from an assessor lead perspective and also from a quality review.
And I'm Jason Barrier. I'm the director of cybersecurity at MedInsight, which is a particular practice within Milliman, which is an actuarial firm. And my background is mostly in biotech startups, so there's a lot of infrastructure, compliance programs, FDA regulations, and having to build things in a way that can be nimble for smaller groups, but also scales to meet some of the rigors that come in with compliance programs. And so I've got 20 years of experience doing that. And so I just brought a lot of that into this space. And when we started doing HITRUST assessments, like, there's a better way to do this. And it's going to be different. And it's going to take you're going to have to think about it and go, really, did he say that we're not going to use Word documents anymore for our policies and procedures? Yes, Word documents are evil. And I will explain and show you a better way. So generally, we're going to talk about a basic collection. And again, this is not a product. This is a process that you guys can implement with the help of your IT teams. This is not just a plug it in, turn it on, and away you go. There's some work involved with this. But if you put the effort in, you'll find that you start gaining this snowball effect of efficiency and visibility, and all of a sudden the world just opens up and you start to see more. We'll talk about what it takes to do an automated collection process for populations and samples, what we're kind of doing for some basic reporting and how we deliver those populations and samples, and then in the middle of this entire presentation we're going to deal with the big issue that everybody seems to get wrapped up around, and that is missing and incomplete data. And summary, it's okay. It's okay to have missing and incomplete and inconsistent data. That's fine.
So background, why are we here today? I know we identified that most of the people in this room are artifact collectors, so maybe we don't have to make a business case to you guys. But really, as we continue to work on HITRUST assessments or any type of compliance activity, what we're continuing to see over time is the scope and boundaries continue to just grow larger and larger. The number of data sources that we have that help support a HITRUST assessment or some other type of compliance assessment continues to grow. I just came from a session 1 or 2 ago over about scoping, HITRUST scoping and boundaries, and we started to talk about the secondary systems and data sources. So inherently, this is going to make our audit engagements, our HITRUST assessments more complex. And so how can we help stakeholders like Jason or any of you guys save time and standardize and make more efficiently the compliance process and how they provide information to external assessors?
Yeah, so anybody know Eric Cole? Have met Eric Cole or talked with him? He's one of the few individuals in cybersecurity with actually a doctorate. And he's got this statement, I think is accredited to him, at least that's what Google says, Prevention is ideal. We really, in the security realm, we want to block the bad guys. We want the adversaries out of our network. We want to prevent them from gaining access. And it'd be easy for us to do if we just poured everything into concrete and dumped it in the ocean. It's secure, nobody's getting to it, but the business needs to function. So while prevention is ideal, we actually need detection. Detection is the absolute critical pinnacle piece of a security program. But implied in that, detection requires data. And data is the thing that we're going to need to switch into to start thinking about all of these different pieces, all of these different parts of our network are available for us to pick at if we spend the time to set up a program to collect that. It's the age of AI, so you have to have an AI chat in there someplace. So I asked ChatGPT, give me a witty saying about data and security and visibility. And it's pretty much right. The data that we're going to collect and we're going to show is the fog lamp, on your car that starts to move out the fog. It illuminates so that we have a better visibility as to the actual effective landscape of our environment. And again, the only way we're going to do that is by looking at data, examining those inconsistencies, and putting the pieces together.
So data sources. So we made the case for why work through this process? Why start to build compliance as code? And as we start to identify and think about when you get that population listing from your external assessor, we start to think about all the different systems and all the different storage and data sources that we have to gather artifacts from to support a HITRUST assessment or other compliance audit. And so as you start to kind of map out that landscape, you can see it just continues to grow larger and larger and larger. And so, the question comes up of, what are the things that we're providing year over year to our auditors from a population perspective or other ways? And how can that be automated? And how can we make something consistent and repeatable over time to help make everyone's lives easier? It also helps as well with turnover if you have at organizations and standardizing some of the processes that you're going to have and how data is collected and provided.
Yeah. I mean, this is a small set. I mean, if I put everything that we collect through this process, it wouldn't be readable to people in the back row. It wouldn't be readable for people in the front row. But it gives you an idea that you have these major buckets of sources. And in most organizations, everybody says, we want best of breed blah. We want the best of breed of SIM, we want the best ticketing system, we want the best CRM, we want the best whatever. The problem is, unless you've got a really talented integration team who's going to create the relationships to get the data into the right systems all the time, there's pieces of information that you need in other locations. For example, in a vulnerability system, what do? We scan all of our assets, we find the vulnerabilities and so forth, and great, we've got a bunch of Sev 5s and Sev 4s and 3s and 2s and so forth. Well, how do you prioritize it? There's nothing really in the the vulnerability management system that says this Sev 5 is more important than that Sev 5. You need more data. You need something, say, from your asset management system, your CMDB, that says, hey, this asset hosts PHI. This asset doesn't. This asset is externally facing, this asset is internally facing. There's properties that you may have in other systems that you need to link together to actually understand what's going on in your environment, to understand the risks that are present. But can you get your ticket system and asset management system to talk directly to the vulnerability scanner? Maybe. You may have to get some sort of connection and developer to put something together. But what if you need to now take that asset information and tie it to, say, your local systems and your collection of stuff from there? So the idea here is that you have data pull it out. Put it in a central location where you can control the relationships, and more importantly, you control the reporting out of one system as opposed to a dozen. So perfection is the enemy. And our approach, or I should state my approach, is that we should expect the data to not line up. And that's okay. That's important. You can run into these examples where, hey, we've got an asset management system. Congratulations, we've got 1,000 computers in this system. And I've got a vulnerability system, and it's got 950 systems. Oops. Why do I have more assets than vulnerabilities, or systems in the vulnerability system? We got to figure out why this is. But if you're only looking at the vulnerability system, you're only looking at the asset systems, you don't know this. Do you have a way to collect all of your malware agents that are installed, or antivirus, anti-malware software? Great, you got some details. Does that line up with your vulnerabilities? Does that line up with your asset management system? Hopefully it does. If it doesn't, not a big deal. Identify why. It may be a collection issue. You may not have the necessary rights, and that's fine. But that also implies that you don't have visibility to everything that you thought you did have. And this is why we start pulling the data out, is it allows us to start these cross connections, these cross joins, to start identifying our gaps where we think we have effective controls, but we're missing something. And it's much better to find it early as opposed to having Sam come in and go, by the way, why do your assets not line up appropriately with your vulnerability system? Those are awkward conversations. So we want to get ahead of this.
And from the external assessor perspective, Jason hit the nail right on the head there. That's the question sometimes you guys get back from your external assessors. Why doesn't list A match up with list B? And starting to work through this process and do that data matching and pulling that information out is going to help reduce the number of questions you get from your external assessor. It's going to help simplify your audit process. It's going to make it go quicker, smoother. And so while it may be a large initial investment, right, as part of that process, it really will pay dividends, right, as you continue to mature in your audit cycle.
So we'll talk really briefly on two different reporting things that we use. We use Power BI when we want a pretty interface, especially for executives and so forth, to look at the system. It also allows us to do those join filters where we can say, hey, I want to connect my asset inventory with my vulnerabilities. And now I can have filters that say, show me all the systems that have PHI, show me these by asset classifications, and then I can start looking at things over time based off of filters controlled and managed through other systems. The other reporting system, which is where I'm going to go with most of this conversation, is by using that data through a Jupyter Notebook, Azure Data Studio, something that is along that lines, where you have your code, which defines what you're trying to report on, as well as the engine that will actually get that data for you. And the punchline at the end is it's also all source controlled, so it's much easier for lots of people to work on at one time. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of how a Jupyter Notebook. Anybody familiar with Jupyter Notebooks, Anaconda? Okay, we've got a couple of people. Okay, so I'm going to greatly oversimplify this, so please don't yell at me. So Jupyter Notebooks kind of come out of the data science realm, where you get to define some Markdown. How many people are familiar with Markdown? Okay, Markdown is very much like HTML, but much, much, much easier. It's very human readable. So you have your Markdown, which may explain, this is the thing I want to do, this is the code that I want to execute, and these are the results from that execution. So all of that can be captured, stored, and it's all text, which means that it's really nice and easy to throw into a version control system where you could have multiple people working on this data at the same time, these reports. So here's an example. This is logical access. These are languages that Zam sent me. He's like, I want a list of all of your temporary privilege access requests. That's the population. And so it's really simple. Pound logical access, heading 1. Pound, LA1, heading number 2. So this is how you just type it in, but when you run it, it just looks a little bit prettier. And as a punchline for later, Markdown converts into any other format easily. PDF, branded Word documents, web pages, easy. So I could export this as a Word document if I needed to. So this is the first part of my Jupyter Notebook that says, this is what I want to do. The next cell is literally just SQL code. Tap into that authoritative source where I've extracted all that stuff out, which we're going to talk a little bit at the end as to what's required to get that going. What's really nice about this, and maybe Sam, you can chime in as to why you like this approach as opposed to me giving you a PDF with a ticket list.
Yep, that's a great point. And especially as HITRUST continues to define information provided by entity standards, documentation and query information like this is going to become more and more prevalent as part of almost every audit request. And we really prefer this as opposed to a random screenshot of a PDF with manually entered information in there, because this really defines for us what this entire query is doing. And it takes us from start to finish to understand what's the information we're trying to gather? How do we know it's going to substantiate the HITRUST control and the associated evaluative elements that we're trying to get from this information? The other thing that we really like about this is year over year, it's the same audit evidence. It helps gain and create efficiencies, again, not only from the client's perspective, but also from your external assessor. The last thing I'll really call out here is it really has everything very properly defined. So anyone can pick it up that maybe hasn't worked on the client or the engagement and really quickly familiarize themselves with what the query has in it and how can we validate that it's from the right data source for our controls.
And because it's code and it's in a Jupyter Notebook, as part of our process, we commit that into a GitHub, an internal GitHub repository, which means that if we want to modify this, say next year, somebody just pulls it down, clones the repository, and they make some changes, and they save it, commit it, and push it back up. And now we have full traceability into how that audit population was generated year over year, and what values and what fields changed and what properties were added, because it's all in version control. So we have the first section, which was the description, the markdown, we have code, and then you can simply hit play. And it will just dump out, it'll query into the SQL database, grab those result sets, and spit out results. And with Jupyter Notebooks, you can do some fancy things with graphs and things like that. But all I need at this point is just a data dump. And I've got a pointer, I don't think I do. So in the upper left corner, there's a bunch of little icons. For their convenience, I just click the export to CSV. But if they wanted it in JSON or HTML or Excel, we could do that easily as well. Why this gets to be really nice is I can have one notebook for logical access with every population that is needed, and then simply go run, and it'll generate all of the populations. And then Sam will come back a week or two later and say, okay, now I need these samples. Well, great. Go to the bottom of the workbook, add a couple new cells. This is the request. This is the code to get that request. And hit play and export those results again.
The other nice thing about this too is depending, what your cycle looks like, you can do on-demand results with it. So it's easily repeatable throughout the year if you have other compliance engagements, right? And it's easily updatable to provide to the auditor. It's also, again, easy for us from the external audit perspective to see exactly the information that was provided and how we can validate the completeness and accuracy of the data set.
Yeah. And getting that data out of those best of breed systems into a central repository means that you can control the reporting process. You don't have to use their crystal reports or whatever flavor of reporting platform they've got. You've got control of how you want all of this data to link together. So the next one I'm going to talk about, so that was an example of just populations of how we would pull some stuff out. The next thing that we do is all of our policies and procedures are in Markdown. We have 0 Word documents except for the ones that I export and convert to deliver to Sam and crew, because it's easier to read a Word document than Markdown. Couple of big things with that. Word has gotten much better with versioning control, with versioning and multi-user edits, and that's all great. But it's really still difficult to find who changed what line or what value at what point in history. It's, once you've accepted the red line, it's gone. Within Markdown, every time somebody makes a save or a commit and they push that into the repository, it's named, you got your name, your address, and the time of that change. And so you can actually go through the entire document cycle over years and see every single change that was released or pushed through without having to look at policy document version 1, policy document version 2, policy document version 3, and trying to manually compare those things. Also, because it's not a Word document, you have some freedom with being able to extract information out of these documents to make your compliance program so much easier to manage. So the example that I'll show here, this on the right-hand side is a copy of the template for all of our procedure documents. All of our procedure documents follow this format, every single one of them. The lion's share of meat obviously exists in the procedure section, but the roles, responsibilities, the schedule, and the artifact sections are crucial design choices. So we state that the schedule is always at bullet point level 1. The action that somebody takes is at bullet point level 2. What that allows us to do is we have a PowerShell script that goes through every single procedure document, 170 of them, pulls out all of the schedules, and then drops them into a CSV. So now I've got one CSV file that has all of my schedules. So I can now create a pivot table and say, okay, show me all of the annual things. Show me all of the bi-weekly things. Show me all of the monthly things. Okay, now let's make sure and correlate that we have a preventative maintenance ticket that is being automatically built out for those particular items. Likewise, roles and responsibilities. We can make sure that we're actually being consistent with names and roles and things within the organization, or the actions that those particular departments or groups are supposed to be responsible for, and make sure that we don't have, in one document, it's assigned to the information technology team, and the other department, it's part of the information security team. Same action, 2 different roles or responsibilities. Oops, now you got a conflict. Nobody wants to do it. So it allows you to validate all this stuff without having to go through and read everything by hand.
And I can't tell you from an external assessor perspective how nice it is to have clients that are able to kind of break down with frequency and have different schedules, and for roles and responsibilities as well. I can't tell the number of times that we've had turnover at clients or change in roles, and all of a sudden everyone's looking at everyone else in the room and it's like, you did the risk assessment this year, right? And so having these types of documentation creates just a simple checklist for you guys to use in your organization to ensure that you're not going to miss a high trust requirement and lose out on points, right?
Yep.
And lose out on scoring. So There's a wide variety of ways to, take this information and apply it to your organization.
Yeah, the one that we almost always forget until the last minute, which this saves us from? Rogue access points.
Oh.
Personal pet peeve. Okay, so that's, obviously I'm not giving you PowerShell code or anything like that. This is more just to kind of explain what you can do with this. How do you get started? Very, very likely, you already have people in your organization that have the skills to do this. You've got people creating these populations either through scripts or whatever other processes. However, are they empowered to automate it? Are they empowered to start spending time, effort, to develop a framework or system to centralize all that data into a single repository that you can leverage? Unless they've been verbally told, do this, they've got too many other fires to take care of. This is going to be an investment, and it's not going to pay out for the first year. But it will eventually pay out. You already have the automation platform. At a very basic level, you've got a Windows server, you've got a Linux server, you've got scheduled tasks, you've got cron processes, you've got all of this already in place. You don't need anything fancy. No additional software required. But you do need to start small. Start simple. Start with the things that will get you the most bang for your buck. So if I were to go back to this list, there are certain things that are easy collection things. Active Directory, by default, is readable by everybody in the organization, unless you've made some funky changes. So you can collect all your users, all your groups, all your group memberships. That can get collected daily and stored, which has a side benefit of being a more of a pre-forensics artifact or storage, because you know exactly what groups and things were at particular points in time. Yes, you could grab it out of a SIM, but this is a different reporting set. That's an easy one to grab. Maybe grabbing things out of your ELM or your library management system for your security awareness training might require a little bit more work. Grabbing data out of your HRIS system might require a little bit more work. Don't start with those. Start with the things where, if you're generating populations for your assessments, start with the things that are going to get you the biggest bang, that cause you the most challenges. User accounts is always a painful process, because I don't know how many of you guys experience this, maybe it's just me, where you have an assessment period, ends on June 30th. And then we go a couple of weeks, and then we get the population request. If you query Active Directory, it's like, go give me a list of all of these accounts that are disabled or active or whatever that population is. Okay, you generate that. Well, how many people have actually experienced where somebody gets terminated or left out or changes occur in that time period? But so now you've got the list of people who are terminated by the 30th, but now their accounts are disabled because they got terminated between, but the population of one doesn't line with the population of the other, and now you've got these conflicts of data. Well, if you go through a process where you're collecting this stuff on a regular basis, you'll notice in my ticket example, I'm grabbing stuff out from particular date ranges. I am ensuring that the data that I'm giving Sam and her team only comes from the period that they're asking for. I'm not collecting it from today. I'm collecting it from my historical records. Which means that I can give Sam a complete list of what my environment looked like at that particular time.
I was going to say, too, I think logical security is a really great recommendation. From an external assessor perspective, right, when we think about the 19 HITRUST assessment domains, Access control is always one of the largest ones. And so I think starting with that as you're trying to get into the journey of compliance as code is going to really be a big game changer. It's also where we see, to Jason's point, a lot of resamples or reselections, right? Because we've received bad data or data that maybe it's right has transpired over time. And so logical security is a really sound starting place, access control, and will really help from an external audit lens.
So the last two sections are, being methodical, starting with things that you can get easy, and then saying, I want to add more. I see value in being able to connect this data with that data, having a plan. The last one, this is where things really shine, is having something like a continuous integration, continuous deployment, development system, CI/CD, allows you to basically take that code and run it as automated jobs that populate and check and validate that information is being collected and stored. And if anybody's got software developers, this is what they do day in and day out. But now we're just taking it from the development side and applying it to IT and security operations to be able to collect this information, store it, validate it, and then eventually you can take that and start building processes to ensure that things are working the way you expect. Finding the assets that aren't in your vulnerability system. You can just have another script that runs and says, hey, join these two data sets together. If I find a gap, send me an email. I mean, ultimately, you might want to have some other process that kicks off, but start simple. Start with just tell me that somebody's not installing the anti-malware package on all of the laptops. And maybe there's a reason for it. But do you know that? So that's kind of the conclusion of this. So I'm going to open it up to questions and thoughts and comments and trivia. Yep, one up here. And I'll repeat the questions out so everybody can hear.
So you would talk about like having all of your policy process information, pulling it that way from that data.
Yep.
So there are requirements within MITRUST that say, the policy documentation, process documentation has to be reviewed annually.
Yep.
There needs to be some evidence that you've done that.
Yep.
So by using documentation, we have history revisions, we show those approval processes. How are you doing that with this?
Sure. So to repeat for the people in the back, how do you show revision history in Markdown, essentially, for policies and procedures? And it's built into source control. So anytime somebody makes a change and saves it, it commits and shows this person said it. Now, to answer your specific question, at the top of the Markdown document we have a header block, which has this person reviewed it at this particular time and made these particular comments or adjustments to it. And when they save and commit it, it's now tied to their user ID. So we actually can say, Skippy made the comment, Skippy also made the commit, so we have traceability that this person pushed this to the repository.
That doesn't show management approval of the changes.
If Skippy is the manager. I mean, is a wet signature?
Annual policy process reviews. And
So do we.
you have stakeholders that make changes that actually do the work on the process.
Mm-hmm.
And then we review the policy changes with our CISO to make sure nothing has changed within the environment.
Yep.
And then he's the authorized approver.
Yep.
Because he owns those security.
Same process. Our chief technology officer, does develop most of the platform that operates.
That would work in every environment.
Sure.
I guess maybe for in this case,
Yeah.
we would want to like print it to Word and then like maybe send there. I don't know how you're currently sharing with your CISO and have them.
Sure.
Or a process where it does all of those documents and they're annually reviewed.
Yep.
He goes in and puts his approval in there and states that he approves.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can. There's nothing in this process that says it can't be. You couldn't have it in Markdown. Convert it into a Word document, print it out. Somebody wet signatures it, PDFs it, and drops it into a file share as the authorized source. That's all perfectly fine. That's all fine. There's nothing wrong with that process.
And And I was just going to say too, right? At some organizations, it might not be the CTO or the director of cybersecurity like Jason or Roger are that are doing the review and the commits of these. It might be some of your individual stakeholders. And so what I would recommend in that, from that approach is, creating a ticket in your ticketing system and documenting the review that way and the related approvals. And then you can assign those changes to be applied if you decided to take this process, right? If it's not somebody that is like management sign off of the review. So there's a lot of different ways that it could be documented if the person that's committing the changes to the policy and procedure code isn't part of like executive management.
Yeah. And again, you can, because this is a code base, you can separate the stages. Approvals can be completely a different process than the actual revision history process. And we're not saving it in a SharePoint. So it has to be some sort of version control system. It doesn't need to be Git. It could be SVN. It could be, please not VS Code or sorry, SourceSafe. But Git, Azure DevOps, whatever, that would work. That was a stretch, not a hand. Other questions? There you go. Yep.
So definitely see the value. It seems like it would be an easier process if you kind of like own the database layer, you have direct access to the database. What if like a big source of data is like your ticketing system, where like you can't directly query the database the same way?
Maybe you do. So, yes. So the question is, it sounds so easy if you own the data on all the systems. Yes, it is absolutely easy when you do that. I don't own the data in all these systems. What we do is, like, for example, there's a library management system for all of our security awareness training and OWASP and all that kind of stuff. I don't own that. But they do have an API. And you do, and what I say is, all I want is read access to the API. That's all I need. And I will figure out, what I need to collect that. Active Directory, it's read access. Qualys, it's an export of an API call that says, give me an XML document, and we do some munging and drop the data in. But yes, I own the data access at that aggregation source to build the tables and the views and all the different things. But the collection and those other systems, I don't want access. I just want to be able to read them. Yep. Which does actually raise some challenges when you start getting into like Azure and cloud services. Getting, read access to not just the, these are the things, but the actual configuration of those things, that's long-term where we're going to need to go to be able to pull that information down to validate how many people have this particular role on these resources across whatever your cloud flavor of the day is. Yeah. Oh, HR data, duh. Softball. So there's certain HR data that is, in my environment, is easy enough to get to. Name, rank, and serial number kind of things. But performance reviews and sanction lists and things like that, no, I don't have access to that, and continues to be a pain in my keister. I've got, I think, probably 50 collections of different things across our environment, and the list keeps growing. I get people in different parts of, and interestingly enough, you start collecting this stuff, other departments start coming to you and go, hey, wait a second, you've got this list of everything that I need for my flavor or requests of the day. Can you grant me access? And all of a sudden you've now become a data broker, which is a whole interesting other side conversation. I saw a hand, maybe it was a stretch. Yep.
That gives me pause because
Yep.
data can only be accessed by people that have a right to have that
Yep.
data. So how are you just telling them to put it in a repository?
Oh, they definitely have to go through approval processes to have access. And because, we didn't get into the devil of the details here, but each of these data sources tends to be within its own database schema, which has its own set of access groups. So people can request access to particular data sets only if they have a need for it, and it's approved by lots of high-level folks. So like nobody's getting access to the employee records, with the exception of a filtered view, which allows our staff to be able to join that and say, here's a list of all employees, and here's a list of all of our security awareness training. Develop an automated process that disables users' access when they haven't completed the last 3 security awareness trainings. Yeah, and yeah, we do it on the 3rd just because, and then the reason why we have some of the HR data is because of FMLA. We're not allowed to disable their accounts if they're on medical leave or things like that, but we don't, without that source, we don't know that. So, yeah. People, it's complicated.
So this might be a question for both of you. So since Active Directory information is so easy to get, generally speaking, unless like you get some sort of third-party lockdown tool or something, we in the past we often use that as our HR data that shows new users. I know that's why.
No.
So maybe you can talk about why that is not sufficient to use Active Directory alone as kind of like your source of record for employee HR data.
Okay.
I was gonna say, I have
You go
lots of
first.
thoughts on that right away. So from an external assessor perspective, and I think generally across compliance frameworks, anytime we're talking about people or contractors, we always want the source or the system of truth, record and truth, to be from an HR system, right? Or something that's being used to manage employees. Active Directory and getting employee listings from that wouldn't be something that we would accept as audit evidence because one, it's not always up to date sometimes,
Well,
shockingly.
it's not surprising. Important fact, a user account is not a person. I mean,
Right.
okay, let's start with, everybody has a user account. How many people have 2 in their environment? 3? 4? I've got 5. Various, different permissions and things for testing and so forth. So that's 5 employees. Nope, that's 5 accounts. So there's that employee in HR records is really one of those really important pieces to get. And it's also really helpful if you can get like their titles for like role changes. And then you can see how that person might have had a role change over time and make sure that their group memberships changed kind of around the same time as they got dropped out of one role and added into another role.
It is a challenge, though, sometimes to work with HR to collect the data. I also think, too, depending on how an organization is set up, there's complexities in how maybe business units are divided, maybe mergers and acquisitions occur. We might have multiple systems of record. So we always want to make sure that we spend time up front, kind of determining what is going to be our source of truth for people, and how we're testing people, how we're testing logical access, and kind of the entire downstream of anything that people touch. So training, logical access, all of those various domain activities.
So to join your 2 conversations or topics, one of the things that is helpful is having real conversations with the data owners, the people that own those systems, and explain what you need and why you're doing this. How many people enjoy generating populations? Yeah, nobody. Neither does HR. They hate it. And they're requested all the time. But if I give them the carrot that I'll collect the population off the data that they grant me access to, and they don't have to do that anymore, I've just improved their day, I've improved my day from a consistency perspective, and the quality is now spot on. Because now people are out of the equation. It's all code driven. We just run these code blocks to pull the data out that we need. Am I running really long? Other questions? If nobody has any more questions, you all have to go back to work, so. Okay. If you have any other questions and you want to talk offline, I'll be up here and we can, talk till the sun comes down.